Hello YouTube. Tamriel is full of interesting characters, from mad emperors to wise mages. Now, today I want to tell you the story of another interesting case, the werewolf who wanted to conquer all of Tamriel and even launch an invasion into Oblivion itself, and who was quite possibly the first ever Khajiit to be turned into a werewolf back in the Meretic era. This is the story of the werewolf Vykosa, and I'll tell you all about it after the intro. So, the werewolf Vykosa. The first thing you may have thought when I first showed you a picture of her in the intro is that she does not really look like a typical werewolf, rather she looks like a mixture of a Khajiit and a wolf, retaining a humanoid form rather than a beast form. This is because among werewolves and their lycanthropes, Vykosa is quite unique, or at least extremely rare and powerful. Because you see, Vykosa was born long ago in the Meretic era, in an age when the Khajiit were still fractured into 16 kingdoms, and perhaps we're not really sure when she was born exactly, even still the 16 tribes before they evolved into 16 kingdoms, in a time before even the elves had landed on Tamriel. At this time, on a far younger Tamriel, the Khajiit Vykosa was born, and over the years she became a huntress, living for the hunt, chasing the adrenaline and quickened heartbeat that came with stalking and taking down prey. Next to using her claws, she was adept with the bow, and she must have been one of ancient Elswere's top hunters, as by showing her skill while stalking prey, she impressed the Daedric prince Hircine, or the Hungry Cat as he's known in Khajiit mythology. He is the Daedric prince of the hunt and patron of Tamriel's hunters, and Hircine was so impressed with her skill that he personally sought out Vykosa in the wastes of ancient Elsewhere. In Vykosa's own words, Hircine then reached out his hand to the young Vykosa and promised her glory and power. In exchange, she had to worship him. Likely she was among the first Hircine worshippers in this ancient Tamriel. However, this worship was short-lived, as after some time, Hircine bestowed upon her his blessing to help her in her hunts. This blessing was the blessing of lycanthropy, making her one of the very first werewolves of Tamriel, with her literally being called a first turned by lycanthropy scholars on Tamriel. Now, something interesting here is that she was not only a first turned, but also a so-called werewolf lord, an extremely rare type of werewolf personally turned by Hircine. This type of werewolf, the werewolf lord, is both more powerful and significantly different from their regular werewolf counterparts. For one, these werewolf lords only undergo partial transformations, remaining in their usual humanoid form, but taking on wolf-like features rather than being turned into the full wolf form. But that's potentially not where the werewolf lord powers end, as we know that Vykosa, after her blessing by Hircine, was able to bend the minds and wills of other werewolves and other wolf-like creatures. And in addition to that, she also became immortal. Although we don't know whether this power to control others and this immortality were a result of her being a first turned or her being a werewolf lord, although it's implied that her status as first turned might be the reason for her immortality, although we're not really sure. But what we do know is that this combination of powers made her a fearsome hunter and a champion for her new patron deity Hircine in ancient Elsewhere. However, this status as Hircine's patron did not last long, as not long after her being blessed by the Lord of the Hunt, she came to regret his blessing, calling her lycanthropy a curse. You see, werewolves are shunned among society, and thus her Khajiit tribe most likely cast her out and hunted her down. And in addition to that, we know that Hircine is not particularly fond of those who describe his gift as a curse, and is thus known to hunt down those who regret their lycanthropy. So from that point on, she became hunted, describing her life as always on the run for hunters, always being frightened, always hiding, likely on the run for both her old comrades in her old tribe who hunted her down, and probably the hunters of Hircine. And like that, she forced her way through the centuries, trying to survive, running from the hunters, living in hiding. And that would have been that. We may have never heard of her again, as she kept a low profile, weren't it for a researcher in the Second Era named Hernande, who was an archivist in an organization called the Silver Dawn, which was a faction dedicated to hunting lycanthropes and werewolves, that will most likely be covered in its own video someday, as their order has its own story. Now, that having been said, in the middle of the Meretic era, Archivist Hernande was working on a cure to lycanthropy, looking to cure the werewolves of the world of their curse, so that they would no longer have to be hunted down. Now, while this sounds like a pretty noble goal, Hernande was ruthless in his methods and seemed to be looking for power and recognition and influence most of all, which was the motivation behind his research. You see, he worked on his experiments in one of the largest bases of the Silver Dawn in all of Tamriel, the Moonhunter Keep, a fortress on the border of Cyrodiil and elsewhere. Here he spent countless hours in research until he thought that he discovered a cure for lycanthropy, a cure for which he had all the ingredients, save one, the heart of a werewolf lord, a werewolf turned by Hircine himself. An ingredient which was extremely hard to come by, as not only were werewolf lords extremely rare, killing one was an even rarer feat, as they were significantly more powerful than your average werewolf. And when he tried to convince the fort's commander to help him ambush one with her forces, she denied his request, knowing how dangerous it would be. Even when Hernande found records and reliable rumors of a werewolf lord hiding out in Valenwood, the werewolf lord Vykosa, she denied his request to try and lure it into Moonhunter Keep. Again, knowing that it would be extremely dangerous to lure such a creature into the keep. So, what did Hernande do? The same thing, and tried to find another way to cure lycanthropy? No. He accidentally infected the commander's husband with lycanthropy, making him a werewolf so that he could convince the commander to try his idea of trapping a werewolf lord in the keep. And this time, desperate to cure her husband, the commander agreed, despite knowing that it was a very bad idea to lure a werewolf lord into their keep. And so they set to work, designing a trap for Vykosa in the Moonhunter Keep. But they didn't understand a very critical thing. Vykosa, who at this point had been alive for 4,000 years, was very used to being the hunted party and knew a trap when she saw one. So she came prepared, likely with a whole pack of werewolves under her control. And so it was that instead of being trapped in Moonhunter Keep, Vykosa used her powers to completely decimate the Silver Dawn forces at the keep, killing many and forcibly turning the survivors into werewolves to serve her, using her powers of control over lesser werewolves to keep them in line. This made her wolf pack increase dramatically, and then she came to a realization. With a pack this big under her control and a solid fortress at her disposal, she could quite literally form an army of werewolves all under her control. And if she did that, not only would she never have to run again, never have to fear again, she would be able to take all of Tamriel, turning all those who stand against her into werewolves that she could control, making Tamriel a place safe for werewolves. Again, a noble goal, but the methods are a bit questionable, and not just that, she didn't treat her fellow werewolves particularly well either. Save for some of her closest lieutenants, she expected blind obedience, magically controlling those who disobeyed, and having those who were difficult experimented on by the castle's archivists. Because yes, the researcher from earlier, Hernande, survived the disaster at the keep and was turned into a werewolf himself. And again, since he was mostly motivated by power and glory anyway, he quickly abandoned his Silver Dawn colors and got to work for Vykosa, who gave him the assignment of making werewolves even stronger through magic. Out of these experiments that he undertook, werewolf behemoths, even stronger and angrier versions of the regular werewolf, were born. Although many of those who were selected for the experimentation either went mad or died during the experiments, which led to their creation. And on top of that, behind her back, the former Silver Dawn archivist was even developing a magical way to escape her control, so that he could use other werewolves to strike down Vykosa, and most likely take power over the pack himself. What an amazing war culture. Anyway, her pack, which she now called the Moonhunter Pack, grew and grew, becoming a proper army over time. They kidnapped locals, which they forcibly turned into werewolves, and many werewolves joined them as they heard of this army in building. Now, it must be noted that not all of the werewolves that came to Vykosa came to rule the world. Rather, many came to her because they sought a place of acceptance, where they could have the strength in numbers to be left alone. But with the whole obey me or be controlled doctrine that Vikosa had, they did not find such a place. Rather, they were still enlisted in her army, because if they would try to run, they would be controlled. Now, by the time of the Elder Scrolls Online, her army had become so big that she was officially preparing to launch an assault to conquer Tamriel, even though these were probably delusions of grandeur, as her army would probably have no way to actually conquering the entire continent, even if it is in chaos. But hey, that was her intention. She probably intended to just expand her army with new werewolves as she went on by infecting all of the opposing armies. In fact, she became so confident that she would succeed that she sent some of her underlings to try and find a way to even invade her Scene's Oblivion realm of the Hunting Grounds next, after having conquered Tamriel, in revenge for the curse that he bestowed upon her and her people. The curse that ruined her and many others' life. Now, in the end, she would never be able to actually send her armies forth, as her armies likely fell apart quickly when she died at the hands of the player of the Elder Scrolls Online, together with the Silver Dawn commander, Adonatus Varian, who had been imprisoned at Moonhunter Keep and infected with lycanthropy himself after he and some Silver Dawn soldiers tried to take back the keep from Vykosa. You and him make your way through the keep in the game, slaying many werewolves, slaying her commanders and slaying the Archivist, and finally slaying Vykosa herself, using her heart to complete the cure that the Archivist had been developing before joining Vykosa's army and curing Adonatus of his curse. And that was the story of Vykosa the Ascended, the first Khajiit werewolf, and a werewolf that tried to conquer all of Tamriel, even if her ambitions probably were a bit delusional, but hey, I thought it was a really interesting story nonetheless. And if you thought so too, and if I managed to teach you something new about the Elder Scrolls universe, why not give the video a like and one of those hype boost things? It would really help my channel out. And now it's time to end the video and thank my top Patreon subscribers. Goblark, Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Volcure of Argonia, RB Dash, Lexicon, Polycom, Sir Otter, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, Spaceman, James Lynch, Baradermas, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen who are my wonderful Patreon subscribers and YouTube members who keep this channel afloat and put me in the position to make these videos in the first place. So, huge thanks to them, and I will see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls Lore video. Hopefully next week. Bye bye.